Hi everybody, welcome to Tuesday Talks. I'm Seema Kumar, and today we're going to talk about a topic that is close to my heart and close to many of your hearts, and that is about women's health. And it's a topic that impacts 52% of the US population. And joining me here to talk about this topic is somebody who's an expert in this arena, who spent her entire lifetime dedicated to this arena. And she's been doing this through data, partnerships, tackling persistent inequities and uncovering biases in research and the immense economic benefits actually of investing in women's health. And she's an extraordinary leader. She's a change maker, and she is Carolee Lee. She's the CEO of WHAM. WHAM stands for Women's Health Access Matters. And as I said, you've dedicated your career, Carolee, to advancing women and then driving equity in the workplace. And your efforts actually earned you a place in Time magazine's prestigious Time 100 list, recognizing you actually as one of the most influential people in health today. So I want to extend a warm welcome to you. Welcome to Cure. Welcome to our studios, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Seema, for the invitation. It's quite wonderful to be here and in the studio with you.
So before we dive into the issues around women's health and inequities and what we're going to do about it, I just wanted to kind of get a little bit of a context about you and your background. You yourself were an entrepreneur, and you founded a company, a jewelry company, that you sold for more than $1 billion. So you were a unicorn before your time, even before they had this terminology called unicorn. So tell me about that business and what you did and how you made it successful.
Well, first of all, thank you for recognizing that I sold the company, but actually I sold it to a company that was a multi-billion-dollar company. I did not sell it for $1 billion, although I like that idea very much, but it was multi-millions. And it was a seminal moment in my life that really propelled me and allowed me to do what I'm doing. But we'll take away the unicorn, at least for now. Yeah. I still like the idea, and I am an entrepreneur at heart, so never rule that out.
Yeah, but we can still use the word unicorn, not to refer to like a $1 billion company, but a unicorn in the sense that this was a unique company that was employed all women?
Totally,
right?
Yes, I appreciate that clarification, and you're absolutely right. It was about 85% women, and that was not intentional, obviously. I would have been sued for discrimination, but it happened because the products that I was making, for the most part, appealed to women, and many of the people employed, both at the department stores, which is where my distribution was, because this was pre-internet, were women. So that happened kind of organically. But I also learned from that so much, because women lead differently, women manage differently. And although I didn't know any of that or didn't really focus on that, it did form who I am today.
And then you founded WHAM, Women's Health Access Matters, in 2020, right around the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Why, and what was the rationale for doing that?
That's such a great question, because obviously I could be playing golf, I could be doing lots of other things, having had this wonderful career, and the theory is take some time off and maybe take a sabbatical, and I guess I'm not one of those people. What I realized throughout my career were that women in many places were either underrepresented, understudied, not included. And I knew most of that data because I had been invited early on to become a member of the board of the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. And for 25 years, I really did get an understanding of how research worked, how a very dynamic group of people at that foundation could see the vision for change in a disease that at the time had very little money being allocated to it for research dollars. And when I left, the budget was about $66 million. And I think I could sit here and say that it changed the face of and the cure rate of breast cancer as we know it today. And so I was very privileged to witness and learn not only about research, but also about marketing. And although deep down inside I'm a marketer, and I'm fascinated by marketing, I didn't realize the impact that bring people from all walks of life into understanding what the impact could be by explaining the incidence of disease and how it might affect them personally, what that could really mean.
You know, that's a really important point that you make, because, you know, we focus a lot on the research, and yes, we need research. We focus on the investment, and yes, we need investment. We need all of the above, but breast cancer story is such a success story. And the importance of marketing is something that people don't understand. The reason it's important is not because it's commercial and all of that, but it's because it brings to people, you know, the importance of research and all of that in lay terms, and it gathers momentum by engaging a whole host of people into the whole campaign, right?
Exactly, and it also has to be personalized and emotional, if you think about it. And if you think about AIDS, which was right before the breast cancer momentum,
yes.
These were two organizations and two diseases that really did galvanize large groups of influential people around them to create a dialogue that hadn't existed before. And a lot of diseases are kept in a closet somewhere, or were kept in a closet. I think that is not the case today, although there are probably some. But the ability to be able to communicate effectively about these diseases and the impact they would make on a woman, her family, or a man, depending on the disease. In the case of breast cancer, obviously 98% women. So yeah, that needed to be talked about, that needed to be shared, and it wasn't up until that point.
Yeah, because whether you talk about AIDS or breast cancer, they both, you know, suffered from like the stigma that society placed on them.
Correct.
And eliminating that stigma and being able to talk openly and honestly about it was a key part of the whole solution, right? So yes, we can claim victory, maybe, you know, at least progress in the breast cancer front. But what about other areas of women's health? Why is there, you know, so much left undone, not yet, not unfinished, I should say, in this arena, and what should we be doing about it?
So that's, you know, that's actually the reason that the WHAM report came about. Is a group of businesswomen who I tended to have as most of my friends and I were sitting around at a conference that I happened to be hosting on women's health, because after I sold my company, it was one of the things that I was interested in doing, was to bring together leaders in the world of women's health, or trying to find them, and share what was really happening, knowing that there was so little data and so little research. And most people don't know this, didn't know it then, still don't know it today. So what I realized at that time was that we needed to understand why no one knew this vast amount of data of how women were either underrepresented, understudied. Mice were not included, female mice were not included in clinical trials until 2016, or in research, not clinical trials necessarily, but in research. And why did this discrimination exist, and what could we do about it? And
because data is important, right? Like
Totally.
Sometimes you intuitively it may make sense, right? This area has been neglected, but unless you can show data and unless you can like show hard evidence, it has to be an evidence-based approach, not an emotional response from a woman.
You
right?
must have been sitting right there in the room, because that's what a group of us said.
Yeah.
So we need data, because we kept talking about these things as, you know, either emotionally or anecdotally. We need hard data. So yes, you're 100% right. And that was when we realized, let's all throw some money in, let's create some kind of momentum. So this is, you know, a while ago now, and that momentum is happening. But let's see if we can provide data that would show what the economic impact would be if we were to accelerate women's health research. Very simply.
Yep.
And we engaged the RAND Corporation to do these studies, and they were quite magnificent in what they did show.
So I want to walk through what it did show, right? And I want to also pick up on the fact that these are a group of business women, and you have to think a little bit about outcomes. And, you know, with a business head to say, okay, what's in it for society? Why invest, right? It's not just about an emotional thing, but there is actual outcomes and economic impact based on investing more in women's health. So what did you find?
Well, first of all, you know, it's a good point, and no one what we found curious was that no one up until that point had asked that question. What's the economic impact? In other words, less than 1% of all research is done on women around the globe. Less than 1%. I believe.
And that's because female bodies are confounding, and that was always the argument?
I think that's part of it. Complicated, messy. Small men, don't know for sure, but a lot of different reasons. But what we realized was that the data was critical. And what we realized was that we wanted a conversation that was focused on the economics, because we needed to also engage the other 48% of the population. And we weren't going to do that if all we were talking about was the messiness or the complications.
Yes.
And so what we did find was very simple. We studied 4 diseases: brain health, cardiovascular, autoimmune, and cancer. We picked those diseases because they would tend to affect women throughout their lifespan or in their lifespan. We intentionally did not focus on reproductive or maternal for the reason that there was a lot of data already out there, and because also women's health, rather than the health of women, is always or often identified as either bikini medicine or OB-GYN or reproductive medicine.
Yes.
And in fact, women from 9 to 90 have lots of different things.
We're not just about the bikini parts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what became very interesting was what we found, because basically it's 15, 12, 7, 4. Those are the percents of dollars allocated by NIH to studying each of those different diseases. And let me just, for example, zero in on cardiovascular disease, which is the #1 killer of women. Less than 4.5% of monies from NIH is allocated to studying cardiovascular disease in women. Really? As women?
Compared to, like, if you compare that to how much is spent on studying men.
Well, and so so there's studies on men and women. It's not broken out, but if you just take the fact that cardiovascular disease is a different disease in women, then you need to study it differently. And 4.5% isn't going to make it.
Enough. Yeah.
But basically, if you added up those numbers, you wound up with an amount of $350 million, which is not a lot of money being invested to study those 4 disease areas in women, 52% of the population. That didn't make very much sense, does it? And then if you double that number, according to the RAND Corporation, you have a return of $14 billion to the economy.
Wow.
That was the number that we were looking for. In other words, and realize this too, Seema, when we did the study, we didn't know what we'd find.
Yeah.
We weren't sure we'd find this kind of, these kinds of nuggets that we feel should impact and sustainably change how research is done today.
Yes.
So double that number, you get a return of $14 billion to the economy. That affects women, obviously, their families, society, and the economy in a significant
way. Yes. And as you said, women are not little men, and so it's not as though you can just take, and it's the same argument with pediatrics, right? Mm-hmm. You have to do pediatric studies to get the pediatric exclusivity, because what you need is, like, children are not little human beings, and so you can't just take an Advil or something and break it into half and give it to them. Similarly, women are not little men, so you need that research to be done. So how was the report received?
Incredibly well, because up until this time, remember, no one was talking about the economics, so there was all of a sudden a fascination and interest in, I think, an eye-opener of, we really should be paying attention to this. So I think we started a wave which is now taking place, which we're thrilled about, which is creating a lot more momentum and a lot more discussion, including President Biden, obviously, as you know, creating an office now, or not, has an office on research for women's health, but creating an initiative with Carolee Missouri running that, focused on how we're going to change how research is done through all of the different agencies and institutes.
And and I, as people are saying, women's health is having its moment.
Totally.
But how do we make sure that it's not the flavor of the month?
Trust me, it's not a moment.
Yeah.
This has been building, I think, for quite a while.
Yeah.
Fortunately, there's a lot of other things that are happening that I think are showing women's leadership in a way that perhaps we haven't seen before. I think it's not a moment for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is there are groundswells taking place and pockets of women in different institutes and organizations who are very forceful and using their voices and the power that they might be able to wield to create change. And so I think you're seeing a combination of lots of different effects taking place that will move this forward in many different ways that we can't even estimate. So this is just the beginning.
Yeah, it's a beginning, and it's hopefully a snowball, and that's gathering a lot of momentum.
Without question.
And that's really great to hear. The other thing I wanted to ask you is, okay, so we first of all, we've known instinctively there's a problem, there's an issue. We've admired the problem for a long time. We now have data to show that this is not something, it's not all in her head, that this is actually a real thing, and that it has an economic impact. So now what? What do we do with this information? How do we move this forward into actual outcomes for women's health and actually create that economic opportunity that we predict is there?
So we have several initiatives because, good question. It's one thing to have the data. I don't want to sit and look at the data or give you,
An
stacks of information.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things that I think we really have to consider. One is that there is a need for greater awareness because, as I said, a lot of the data that we had that we knew as a group of pretty savvy women, they were just as many wonderfully successful business women who I might be speaking to who said, you can't be right, we would know this data. So, when you look at all the stats and you start feeding them out, there's a resistance because they're just so ludicrous, you can't be serious. Yeah. So part of it, I think, you do have to create greater awareness. Having said that, WHAM is focused on creating action plans that can implement and execute on the data. 3 Not 30 is one of the goals that, and one of the ways that we feel as an initiative can take into account some of the things.
So explain what 3 Not 30 means.
Changing things in 3 years. We're not waiting another 30. So a year ago, June, we hosted a conference, a forum in DC, where we brought together different leaders, some from government, some all different parts of the ecosystem, from the financial markets, from academia, from the world of business, with an intention of challenging them that let's celebrate. This is the 30th anniversary of the Revitalization Act, which 30 years ago mandated or set guidelines for having women in clinical trials and research. Okay, great.
Yep.
We're not waiting another 30 years.
Yeah.
So what can we change in the next 3 years?
Yes.
And so we then, after we had Barbara Mikulski, Connie Morella, Nancy Pelosi, and a number of wonderful people agreeing that, this is a moment, not a moment that's just going to be fleeting, but this is the beginning, if you will, of let's change this. What can we do? What can we implement? What goals can we set forward together to create impact and change?
Yeah.
And then after that celebration, we hosted a roundtable where everyone had to give their ideas of what can you change, Seema, in 3 years, not 30?
Yeah.
And so we synthesized all of those ideas, compiled them, and we wound up with 3 goals. What are they?
Yeah.
Double the budget. Well, thank you, President Biden. He has kind of taken that $350 million number, and through ARPA and other means, we've kind of close to checking that box.
Yep.
The second part of that was double the 2% that goes to VCs, from VCs to women-founded businesses. That needs to be 4, and that's what we're working on through creating our investment collaborative. And in the investment collaborative will bring together the leading investment companies focused on investing in women.
Yep.
So that needs to change because right now 2% isn't going to hack it.
Yep. And is double enough?
No, of course not. It's ridiculous, but you know what?
I think to start somewhere.
You have to start somewhere, and doubling. When this study is done that we're working on with KPMG to show what the economic impact will be, we'll probably be changing that number.
Yeah.
But right now, that's what we started with, or that's what the group started with. And then the second
seed round.
Exactly, exactly. And then the second goal in 3 Not 30 was clinical trials.
Yeah.
Seriously, less than 5% of black women are in clinical trials.
Yes.
I don't think that was the mandate 30 years ago. That has to change.
Yep.
Women generally are not included in the clinical trials that they need to be in by age, stage, disease, burden of disease, et cetera. So what did we do and what are we doing about that? We created our first PPAP, private-public academic partnerships, which is with Northwell Health, Walgreens, KPMG, and WHAM, to in fact help initiate some of the plans ambitious plans that Walgreens has to change how clinical trials are accessed through underserved areas. So bringing together different parts of the ecosystem, we believe, and partnerships are a very important part about how change takes place.
Absolutely.
And then the third goal, which is probably my favorite one, is creating accountability indexes. Well, what does that look like?
Yeah, what does that look like? Yeah.
So imagine if you could create some criteria by which different ways that we currently operate are measured. I don't want to shoot anyone down. I want to point to the good people who perhaps are creating and implementing change and supporting what needs to be. So in other words, we can't have 2%. So which of those firms perhaps are supporting investment in women? And so create an index that shows what is it, what criteria are they meeting to do that, what impact is it having? And basically what that shows is who's not doing it.
Yeah.
So we love this idea of accountability.
And there's something, about the competitive spirit of ranking
Totally.
that, sort of, whether it's good or bad, it incentivizes behaviors towards wanting to be number one. I remember the Access to Medicines Index that was, created a while ago to make sure that medicines are accessible to as many people. And people would do a lot of things, and it kind of like created these behaviors in organizations where they were creating more access to medicines. And so hopefully this will do that.
Oh, fascinating. I need to look that one up because I'm always looking for good examples.
Yeah, we should talk about that.
Please.
Because I think there's some lessons to be learned from that, and
Very much.
the methodology of how it was done, because it was very credible and and all that. And we should definitely
definitely. I will
talk about it. Yes, right.
I will pick your brain on that one.
And so we've talked now about enablers, right? And three things that you've mentioned, which, and I love the three, focus is important because can't boil the ocean, so we need to pick the top three and go after them. But there's also barriers, because you need to, at the same time eliminate barriers as you're trying to create, enable women. What do you think are those barriers, and how do we eliminate them? What do I mean by that? We need more women in science. We need more women in leadership positions. How do we, and there's still barriers to those. People are leaving the workforce sometimes. So how do we tackle the barriers, you think?
It's such a great question.
Yeah.
When you first used the word barrier, I've never thought of barriers. I only think of opportunities.
Yes.
It's funny. I don't
I know.
I don't view that roadblock.
Yeah.
I view how am I getting around it.
Yes.
So let me try to answer, because I personally
I only ask that, Carolee, because some of the things, some of the data and surveys that we have done, even as recently as earlier this year, show that there is still barriers that maybe it's self-imposed, maybe it's not, maybe it's the system, but there are barriers that women feel that they can't accomplish what they want to accomplish, or that it's harder for them, twice as much harder, 3 times as much harder to get to the same whatever it is, whether it's a functional position or it's a result or whatever it is, than it is for men. And so what are those barriers and how can we eliminate them seems to me to be like the opposite side of the coin as well. That's why I asked you about it. Yeah.
Maybe having women healthier might also eliminate them.
Yes.
But that's naive of me. Look, you're a perfect example of a successful woman who is a role model within an organization, to which I am sure many women
right back at you.
Can look up to. You need that.
Yeah.
There's bias, unintended and intended, that is rampant and always has been. I'm not sure I can change that. I don't view it as a barrier.
Yeah.
I recognize it, and so what can I do, perhaps in other ways that might minimize it, or I'm not sure I can actually change it.
Yeah.
Role models and leadership is incredibly important for women, and especially in the world of science. We need more women in science, as you said. We need to do that by obviously elevating those women who are already there. I believe the number that I came across recently is less than 12%, I think it's 12% of the people who are deans of medical schools are women. That is not showing a path forward. And then you have more women in medical school than men, but you have less leadership. That's not showing a path forward.
Yes.
that has to shift. I don't know how that I personally can make that shift, but I'll tell you what WHAM is doing that should have an impact on that. And so our WHAM, we have 3 collaboratives. Our WHAM Research Collaborative, which was the first one that was formed, which was to identify, at the time in 2019, I think, the less than 14 institutions that supported women's health research.
Oh, wow.
Seriously?
Yes.
Look at the numbers again that you're marketing to, and look at what you have.
Yes.
So part of what we have set out to do is to identify, we're almost at 100 researchers around the US and globally who in fact can impact how research is done, and with whom we can create a coalition, a convening, a collaboration to bring them together, to understand what their issues are, to help them through different work streams become leaders in their fields.
Yes.
So we're doing it maybe in a more bottoms-up way, but by inclusively bringing together those who we do feel ultimately, by being a greater mass, can have an impact.
Yeah, in our ecosystem here at Cure, we have our sister company that does something called Break into the Boardroom, which is getting women ready and placed actually in boards as part of the growth, right? The personal and professional growth. And there are many other programs like that, and women in science and women in STEM and taking science to the streets, et cetera, which are all examples of ways we could do this. And so, like you, I live though in the land of opportunity and not in the land of barriers. And so I think the opportunity is enormous. In the power of the collective, which is what you're alluding to, there is power in that, in collaboration, in the collective, rather than trying to individually, quote unquote, fight the system.
I think so, and I think the other area that we look to are our partnerships. So if I look at La Jolla Institute for Immunology, for example, which is led by a brilliant scientist, Erica Ullman-Sapphire, where we are always trying to mentor, if you will, or partner with institutions, foundations, many of them who have female leadership. Now that actually I'm thinking about it, whether that's Northwell Health, although Michael Dowling is obviously very much in a leadership position there, but so is Jill Kalman, Stacey Rosen, many others with whom we partner. And Go2 Foundation is led by a woman, Bright Focus Foundation, a number of entities that we deal with, in fact, now that I'm thinking about it, are led by women. So, and it's not that is, again, that's not intentional. It was an awareness that you just created for me, but it is creating more of a critical mass of collectivity that is more powerful.
Absolutely. And, speaking of quote unquote powerful, like you made it to the Time 100 list. I mean, that is just phenomenal. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, when they called you and told you you've made it to the 100 list, what was your reaction?
It's a little bit, supposedly a lot of women have the imposter syndrome thing happening, but I was looking around the room a little bit, but when they first called, it was more just to get some more information about WHAM, and so I thought, interesting. I mean, we talked to, obviously, a lot of press. The second call was more pointed, which I needed to send an up-to-date photo and all kinds of things, a lot of which I didn't have the quality of what they wanted. That was the funny part of the story, at least for me, because it was like, wait, why do they want this?
Yes.
So I had no clue. And then the email came that said that you've been selected. It's a wonderful honor. It's a wonderful recognition. I had no expectation whatsoever at all that something like this might happen. How fantastic, though, for WHAM.
Yeah.
How fantastic for the topic that we're discussing.
Right.
This is about moving the needle and changing how women's health has been either understudied, under-researched, underinvested, however you want to look at it. So if you want to talk about barriers, those are the barriers.
Yes.
How do you remove those?
Yes. And it's possible.
Yeah.
And, and not only is it possible, it creates, great economic impact for society as a whole, right? And you are a serial entrepreneur, right? And so what advice do you have for women entrepreneurs who are all, trying to make it as a founder, as a CEO, trying to raise money and bring forward, incredible impact in healthcare.
So some of the things that you and I have experienced in our lives, where you mentioned different organizations to which you've belonged and through which you've received advice, counseling, guidance, are very critical. Finding mentors, male or female, is highly important. People that you can talk with who can help steer you, especially in moment of need. Being clear on, is this what you want? Because for a lot of women, and I've seen this more and more recently, thinking that this is the path you should take isn't necessarily the path. COVID certainly proves that to a lot of women. I think it set a lot of women back a number of years. But for many, it really gave them an opportunity and a chance to value and realize what was truly important to them. So I think first thing is understanding and acknowledging what truly is important. And then finding those that collective wisdom, both individually and as a group, that can support you.
And even though we as women have so many things in common, we're still individuals and our needs may be different. And I may want to be a CEO, another person actually wants to be something else, another person wants to be a researcher, another person wants to be in a different industry. So we're all different people. And my question for you is, do you think and do you have high hopes for us as a collective to make impact in 3 years?
Oh, I do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be.
You would
I wouldn't be sitting here with you. I'd be at the beach. I absolutely do. I think there is a tremendous groundswell. I think there is huge momentum. I think there's a heightened level of interest and acknowledgement that these inequalities are not beneficial for anyone. Women do drive economies, and I think we need to acknowledge that we all need to be healthy. So this is not an unrealistic idea. And yes, of course I do, and I think everything that WHAM is doing is, in fact, and sitting here with you, for which I'm greatly appreciative, all of these are elements that move this agenda forward. And
at CURE here, we are greatly appreciative of you being here, and we're looking forward to partnering with you on this, initiative, and looking forward to more on that. Now, before we go, I wanted to ask you, what does the word cure mean to you? Or even the concept?
That's a big question. So I should know from my years of studying Latin what the word what the roots of the word are, which I'd be curious now. Of course, I'll look it up after, but I'm going to apply it to this conversation. If we think about cure as a means of prevention and then treatment and then outcomes, I want them all to look differently. I want them to be looking like our population looks and be applied that way, so that when we are either doing research, investing in companies, or working towards a cure, whatever that might mean in different ways to different people, that we're respective of the 52% of the population that needs to have a place at the table and whose cells need to be studied.
Well, thank you so much, Carolee. Thanks for joining us here on Tuesday Talks and for being here at CURE, and looking forward to more, and looking forward to working together to get to our goals.
Oh, so am I, Seema. It's such a pleasure to be with you, and I'm really, truly looking forward to a partnership with you.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for watching, and send us your questions, and look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday.